Hello. Thank you so much for joining me today. How you doing? The secret of the Scandinavian economic miracle. Very interesting. Honestly, I know nothing about it. Nothing. So I'm very fascinated about this subject right here. I like economics in general. So this is fascinating. I know you guys up in Scandinavia have amazing social safety nets, these types of things, high GDP per capita, So, how is it done? What's the secret? Explained with Dom. Check him out, link down below. Let's do it.
List measuring human. If you look at almost any list measuring human development around the world, you can be sure about one thing, that these 5 countries will be somewhere in the top 10. Whether it's the state of democracy.
I'm like, what? Wait. What? Norway? I'm gonna be 100% honest, guys. Let me just be 100% honest for once. No, I'm always honest, to be honest. I'm probably too honest. I didn't even know this existed. What is this? Svalbard? Oh my god, I had no idea this entire freaking continent existed. What is there? How cold is it? I'm going to react to this entire place tomorrow, I think. Svalbard. I'm writing it down. Sorry, y'all. Give me a moment. I just can't believe it. And is it, I guess it's part of Norway? I had no clue.
Democracy, human rights, lack of corruption, trust between citizens. So
I'm sorry, I'm so distracted by that.
State of
Need to lock in.
democracy, human rights, lack of corruption, trust between citizens, social cohesion, gender equality, human development index, happiness index, it's always the same. Looking at those lists, human development index, happiness index.
Finland, happiest place on earth. Okay. Wow. Why are y'all so happy? I think of Scandinavian people as being very quite serious, quite zen, serious. I don't think of them as being like, I'm so happy. Okay. Anyway.
Index, it's always the same. Looking at those lists, Scandinavia just seems to be best at, well, everything. It looks like these few countries somehow found a recipe for success.
What's
unique
the secret?
Combination of economic policies and social values that became known as the Nordic model. But
yes, the Nordic model.
What is the Nordic model exactly? And
I don't know, because I tried to react to it and it was a disaster of a video.
why is it so successful? Is the reputation of the Scandinavian countries deserved? And if it is, then why don't we replicate their model
Damn. I would be happy too if I lived here.
everywhere? This
I am happy.
is the secret of Scandinavian success, the Nordic model. The answer to
Hell of an intro.
all of this is a little complicated, but the best way to start might be at a time when Scandinavia was not doing so well, and when it was going through one of its biggest crises, and facing a number of pretty severe economic and political challenges. In the
Like Great Depression type?
war period of the 1930s. Back then, the region was, like most of the world, badly affected by the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis of the 20th century, and the Nordic countries were hit pretty hard. The unemployment was extremely
It's crazy to me how the ramifications of the Great Depression just were around the entire world.
high, almost at 40% in Denmark. Businesses were bankrupting, and even independent farmers, who made up a backbone of the economy, were struggling just to get by. And just as in other parts of Europe, the economic hardship was fueling political radicalism and populism, as extremists on both sides of the spectrum were becoming more popular. Scandinavian communists were trying to overthrow the system through class warfare, creating rifts in the society and turning the local lower classes against the elites, while fascists were attacking the nature of democracy itself, presenting it as ineffective and weak. To get through the crisis, the Nordic countries had to respond in a way that would address both the economic crisis and the political challenges. And the solutions that all of them chose defined what the Nordic model is, and what Scandinavia would have looked like in the following decades. First, the Nordic countries decided that the way to keep the society together in the times of the crisis is through a massive state spending and government-funded programs to help the people affected by the economic hardships. Previously existing measures like unemployment benefits and old age pensions were massively expanded, aiming to provide at least some means for people who are out of job or too old to get one. And they were complemented by a number of other welfare measures aimed at improving the lives of the lower classes.
It's also fascinating to me because part of that, like I hear that, I am like, that sounds awesome, but how does it paid for? Like, wouldn't that just cause a lot of inflation or debt? Like, how's it paid for?
Subsidies for decent public housing, or benefits for families with children. This is when the modern welfare state was born and became a first key part of the Nordic model. In the following decades, the Nordic countries continued to expand on those core programs.
You know what I'm just thinking right now is that, like, a welfare state is kind of like, that's kind of like a dirty word here in America. That's like something, you don't want to be a welfare state. But is it a dirty word? Like, is it offensive in any way to refer to these countries as welfare states? Or is it kind of like how, like, socialism is a dirty word in America?
Established in the 1930s, but the basic idea is still the same. To keep the society together and to keep different classes from clashing, you need to help the lower classes that need helping the most, and you need to integrate them into the society rather than to exclude them. And the idea is that even though this can cost a lot of money, it's still worth it. Because if you don't help them, the poverty, homelessness, and unemployment will end up costing you even more. That's why the welfare state in Scandinavia casts a wide social safety net, making
That makes a lot of sense to me. It does make a lot of sense that, you might say, oh, it's so expensive, but, it's kind of like healthcare in America. Like, it's more expensive for people to be uninsured because then it's much better to go to the doctor regularly and catch diseases early and, get health advice early and stay healthy than it is to just let people be sick and then try to deal with it afterwards. That's much more expensive and difficult.
sure that even when you lose your job, you won't hit rock bottom, and the state is actively trying to help you to get back on your feet and back into the workforce as fast as you can. Because, as opposed to what many people might think, the point of the Scandinavian welfare state is not to keep people hooked on the state benefits forever, but rather the opposite. Scandinavian countries are surprisingly strict and generous at the same time. People who are left without a job are given generous unemployment benefits, but only as long as they are actively seeking work. And
that makes sense. I was gonna say, so how do you prevent people from mooching off it? Because that's in human nature, you know. If someone's giving you something for free, you're probably not gonna go back to the factory 8 hours a day and work for it. But okay, you have to be looking for a job. That of course makes sense.
following the same pragmatic logic, the Scandinavian welfare state puts a lot of effort into trying to elevate the poor to become the middle class. The idea is the same. A strong middle class and economically equal society is good for social cohesion, while having a lot of very poor people is both expensive and creates a divided society. That's why the Nordic education, healthcare, and social services are free or almost free for everyone, and focus, at least in theory, on making sure that everyone has a more or less equal opportunity to build a solid career and have a decent quality of life. The downside of this is that the welfare state doesn't come free, and the Nordic countries have famously high taxes. In Denmark, the average person pays 45% of their income on taxes.
Isn't there like a wealth tax as well?
Compared to 22% in the United States and 24% in the UK. But
the UK is only 2% higher than the US. But you guys get free healthcare over there in the UK. How does that make any sense? I guess ours just goes to the military.
Taxes in Scandinavia are not just a way to provide the state with enough money to pay for everything, but they also serve as a tool for redistributing wealth and helping to keep the income inequality low. Basically, it's harder to become really wealthy, and it's also harder to become extremely poor. But it's relatively easy to stay somewhere in the middle. When this concept was first formed in the 1930s, in Sweden it was called folkhemmet, people's home, implying that the state is not just a detached bureaucratic body.
I guess so. Then I'm wondering, do successful people not leave from the incentive of like, hey, you know, you're rich, you don't need the welfare programs, you're paying a lot of money in taxes for these welfare programs that you don't need? What if you moved to a different country and paid, you know, no tax? Because that is a lot of the argument I feel like here in America, as far as, you know, oh, we want to incentivize, you know, rich people and rich companies to stay here and not move out. Clearly it's working, though. I'm just asking the questions.
But rather a home or a family for its people. In this concept, all citizens are part of this family, and as such, everyone needs to be treated fairly and equally. And even more importantly, the common good of everyone, of the family as a whole, is what really matters.
Oh, I see. Okay. That's a major cultural distinction. Whereas here in America, it's very individualistic.
And it is more important than the good of the individual. This is somewhere in the middle between the super individualistic model in the United States, where the state is there only to provide the basic minimum and everyone should rely on themselves, and the totalitarian communist model in the Soviet Union, where the rights of the individual were basically non-existent. That's why the Scandinavian model became
Fascinating.
famous during the Cold War in the English-speaking world as the middle way.
I never heard that. The middle way. The story of a constructive compromise between socialism and capitalism.
In part of the Nordic model, which was also born in the 1930s, is what became known as the Great Compromise. In Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, unions of employees and unions of employers agreed that in order to prevent a conflict between different classes, they must find a compromise that would make everyone happy. And so through different agreements, employers
make everyone happy. Okay. That's a hard thing to do. I mean, it's kind of like Forrest Gump, you know. Have you seen Forrest Gump? You know, they say, oh, you know, you're rich, Forrest. And he says, you know, you don't have to worry about money anymore. And he says, oh, good. One less thing. Anyway, it's definitely a good goal.
A compromise that would make everyone happy. And so through different agreements, employers in all the Nordic countries agreed to guarantee decent wages, safe working conditions, and a maximum of 10 working hours per day for everyone, while the employees agreed.
That's still a lot, you know, but okay, yeah. There are a lot of jobs, like in healthcare, for instance, where they're working 12 hours.
Not
here in America.
To protest and strike, as long as their employers kept their word. This unique model of cooperation between workers and business owners remains until today, and many of the working conditions are negotiated directly without the intervention of the state. That's why, for example, Nordic countries don't actually have a national minimum wages that would be mandated by the government. At the same
That's a really interesting thing.
time, a different compromise was reached in politics. In most Nordic countries, social democratic parties have dominated politics since the 1930s, but they formed a consensus with other parties, like liberals, conservatives, and farmers, not just to push through the necessary reforms, but also to show that democracy still works and that compromise in politics is possible. But there is one more aspect that makes the Nordic model possible in the first place, and which also explains why it doesn't work anywhere else. This often overlooked aspect are the unique cultural values and social characteristics, which can be summarized as social trust.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So why can that not be anywhere else? I thought he was going to say natural resources.
They have been dubbed the real Nordic gold, and they are what really makes Scandinavia stand out. The thing is that if you took any given country and tried to introduce the Nordic model, redistribute the wealth through really high taxes to pay for free state-provided services for everyone, chances are that it wouldn't really work. People wouldn't want to give up the benefits of their hard work through high taxes, and they wouldn't trust that the state is competent enough to redistribute them.
Absolutely. Correct. Yep. That's how people feel. That's actually how I feel for the most part about here in America. Like, yeah, okay, yeah. You guys seem totally incompetent at everything, to be honest, so I don't know about it.
But Scandinavians are willing to take part and willing to share, not just because they have to, but because they trust that it's the best thing to do.
I love to pay my taxes.
Yeah, I like paying taxes.
What? What? Are these people being held captive, or are they actually saying this? I like to pay taxes. Is that the right thing to say? No, this is crazy to hear.
Scandinavians just trust both each other and their governments a lot more than anyone else. And that's the reason why they are willing to give up their wealth.
Well, I feel like trust is, earned, you know what I mean? It's proven. It's, when the state is low corruption, you don't have to trust it so much. And when you have democratic models built in that work, you don't have to trust it. You just have to know the protocol works.
And support
What I'm saying is it's probably not blind trust.
the welfare state. And the crazy thing is that although the welfare state was born in the 1930s, this high level of trust has been in Scandinavia way before that. According to Andreas Berg, who researches this topic in Sweden, Swedes have had higher levels of trust in each other and their state way back in the 19th century, and possibly even before that. Which means that the high level of trust is not an outcome of the welfare politics, the culture of compromise, or the fair legal system. It's what made it possible in the first place. And
So what about like immigration? That's a factor here I'm curious about. Like, I'm surprised there's not a whole lot of immigration to these countries, because it's obviously just an incentive. If a government or state is very generous in their welfare programs, then people around the world who are poor are incentivized to say, I want to live there. And they will try to live there. At least a portion of them. You know what I'm saying? That's just, it's like math. So what's the dealio with that? I guess I'm going to look up maybe some stats on immigration. I guess we'll just do Norway. 16.8% of the population. Okay, well, I found the net migration rate per 1,000 people. That's pretty cool. Syria, okay, I mean, yeah, that's just because of war and stuff. Displacement, yes. Luxembourg, okay. I think that's because a lot of people travel to and from Luxembourg just for work. Ireland, Australia, Canada. So there's Norway, 31, 3.8. Where's America? America. 3.0. Okay. Is this counting? I don't think this is counting illegal immigration. Because I think there's, it's like most of the immigration into America is illegal. But okay, interesting. It's similar, a little higher than America, for instance, but lower than other European countries. I guess I'm wondering if immigration is, are the borders relatively open or relatively difficult to immigrate there?
And that's why without this trust, the Nordic model just won't work somewhere else. But as for why Scandinavians trust people so much,
I was hoping he would talk about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I know nothing about it, but I believe in Scandinavia. Well, I really know nothing about it.
that's a more difficult question to answer. Some historians point to the influence of Lutheranism, a Protestant branch of Christianity which was historically the state religion in Scandinavia, and which has equality and egalitarian society as one of its core values. Others argue that it's the climate, and point to a theory that people from colder climates generally have higher levels of social trust, because they had to historically rely on each other and their close neighbors for survival.
That's cool.
Another factor might be that the
That's an interesting theory.
Nordic countries have experienced a lot more internal and external stability. The last time Sweden was at war was in 1814.
I'll let that go.
And external stability. The last time Sweden was at war was in 1814, and the last time a leading political figure was killed in Denmark was in 1286. And while the history of the Nordic countries is obviously not entirely peaceful, compared to the rest of the world, it's marked by much less violence and internal conflicts. And finally, there is the geography. Historically, the Scandinavian states have had large territories with long distances between settlements, which made it difficult for the Nordic kings and nobles to exercise strict control over their population. And this meant that the ruling class had to actually try to provide services for their citizens if they wanted to control their land, rather than just collect taxes. In other words, even back then, there was an expectation that those who rule the country should be actually doing something useful for their people. And
yeah, they should be.
this limited control also
What a concept.
enabled the rise of a class of independent farmers, which became the foundation of the future strong middle class, the backbone of the Scandinavian societies until today, and a big factor leading to a higher social trust between people. It's difficult to pinpoint one specific reason, and most likely it was a combination of all of them. But the bottom line is that the reasons which made the Nordic model possible date way back into history, and that means that the birth of the Nordic model is less about policy decisions and more about the unique combination of factors that have shaped the Scandinavian societies for hundreds of years. And that's why it's almost impossible to recreate the Nordic model somewhere else, because while you can replicate some of the policies, without the underlying fact.
It is interesting, and that's kind of like a sad truth that a lot of people, I mean, they kind of either wish it wasn't true or they just don't know it. They don't recognize that that's true. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, that's awesome that it works for these countries. And we can definitely learn some stuff here in America. I'm not saying we can't. That's not at all what I'm saying. All I'm saying is you can't compare exact stats and stuff and be like, oh, it's obviously because of this. You know, if you guys just did this, then you would have this outcome. That's very much not been proven to be not true. In all sorts of different ways. I don't even know which way you might be thinking I'm meaning that. I'm not meaning it in any way. I'm just being very vague. But it's just the truth of the matter. Culture runs very deep, deeply rooted, and it influences a lot of things. Anyway. This room is a mess, huh? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.